You ever notice how the quiet parts of your life feel harmless until one day they aren't? Until one day that same quiet feels heavy, tense, and unfamiliar, like someone changed the air inside your own home. That's what my mornings had become. Not peaceful, not gentle, just quiet in a way that made my chest feel tight. I used to think a silent home meant everything was calm. That if there were no arguments, no slammed doors, no raised voices, then things were fine. But silence has its own language, and I didn't understand it back then. I didn't know that silence can hold things louder than any fight ever could. Every morning I woke up before the sun, hoping I'd feel something different, some warmth, some sense of being seen. But the house stayed cold, not because the walls were cold, but because the connection between us had frozen without me noticing. We lived under one roof, but we moved around each other like two names written on opposite sides of a page. She'd sit at the table, scrolling through her phone, eyes lit by a screen that showed more emotion than she showed me. And I kept telling myself it was nothing. She was tired. She was busy. She was stressed. I gave myself excuses because the truth was too sharp to touch. The truth was that her attention had drifted somewhere I couldn't reach. There were signs, small ones that felt easy to ignore. The late-night phone calls she took outside. The way she'd tilt her screen when I walked behind her. The nights she came home late with words that sounded practiced, like she was reading from a script she didn't care to memorize. But when you love someone, you don't look for cracks. You look for reasons to believe everything is still whole. And I kept doing that. I kept forgiving what I should have questioned. I kept hoping for a warmth that wasn't coming back. One night, I remember watching her sit on the edge of the bed with her back to me. Rain was tapping the window. The room felt smaller than usual, like the silence was pushing against my chest. I asked if she was okay. She nodded, but she didn't turn around. And in that moment, I realized how far away she was while still being within arm's reach. I didn't understand it then, but that moment was the start of something breaking inside me. Not loud, not sudden, just a slow fracture, spreading quietly through everything I thought I knew. I still believed love could be fixed. I still believed she was just lost, not gone. I still believed we were holding on to each other. But the truth? I was the only one holding on. And in that desperate grip, I didn't see that I was already being left behind. Then came the night I heard her whispering in the hallway. Soft, gentle, a tone she hadn't used with me in months. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. There was warmth in her voice, a softness I thought had simply died over time. But it wasn't dead. She just wasn't giving it to me anymore. When she came back, she wouldn't look at me. Just a friend from work, she said. And it was the way she said friend that made it feel like a weight had been dropped inside my chest. That word used to be harmless. Now it felt like a warning. I tried to let it go. Try to trust her. Try to trust us. But trust starts to break long before anything actually happens. It breaks when you start noticing the things you're not supposed to notice. The late nights that don't add up, the sudden plans that don't have explanations, the quick smile she hides the moment you walk into the room. I finally asked her one night, "Are you happy with me?" She paused, not for a moment, for a truth she didn't want to say. And then she whispered, "I'm just tired." She didn't explain what she was tired of. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything. That's when I realized the storm had already started. I just didn't want to look at the sky. There's a moment in every relationship when you start feeling something you can't explain. Not a scream, not an argument, just a shift, a quiet tilt in the air that tells you something isn't the same anymore. That's how it began for me. Not with a fight, but with a feeling. A feeling I tried to ignore because I didn't want to face what it meant. Days passed, and the space between us stretched wider with every sunset. It felt like I was losing her in slow motion, like watching someone fade into the distance, even though they were still standing in the same room. I told myself it was stress. I told myself she needed time. But deep down, something in me whispered that the ground beneath us was starting to crack. It started small. She didn't laugh like she used to. Her eyes didn't light up when I spoke. Her questions disappeared, replaced by short, distracted nods. Even the couch became a map of our distance. She sat on the farthest corner, scrolling, always scrolling, as if her entire world was on that screen. Her phone never left her hand. It became her shield, her comfort, her secret. And I started to realize she held her phone the way she once held me. Close, protected, with a kind of attention I hadn't felt in a long time. Nights were the hardest. She turned her back to me, not out of anger, but avoidance. Her breathing was steady, but it didn't feel real. It felt rehearsed, like she was pretending to be asleep, just so she wouldn't have to speak to me. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how two people can share a bed and still feel miles apart. There are moments that don't tear your life apart violently. They don't shout or explode. They just arrive, quietly, suddenly, and without mercy. And when they do, they don't just change your life. They expose the truth you've been too afraid to see. For me, that moment came on a rainy evening I'll never forget. She told me she was going out to help a coworker with a project. Her voice carried a slight tremor, the kind you only notice when you've been listening for weeks. Part of me heard it. Part of me pretended I didn't. By then, I was used to swallowing suspicions just to keep myself from falling apart. But that night, something inside me refused to stay silent. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was a heaviness, a quiet ache in the center of my chest telling me that whatever I feared was no longer a fear. It was a reality waiting for me to face it. I got in my car, not to chase her, not to expose her. I wasn't looking to be right. I was looking for something far more painful, the truth. The rain came down in thin, relentless sheets, each drop tapping against the windshield like a reminder I couldn't escape. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I kept hoping I was being paranoid, that this was all in my head. But deep down, I knew better. When I reached the cafe she always mentioned, I saw her car. My heart stuttered, but I held on to hope with shaking fingers. Maybe she really was helping someone. Maybe this was just me overthinking again. But hope is fragile. And that night, it didn't survive. I walked toward the window with steps so slow it felt like the world was pulling me back. And then I saw her, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. Not tired, not stressed, not distant. She was smiling. A real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in months. The kind she used to save for me. He reached across the table and touched her hand, and she didn't pull away. She leaned closer, laughing softly, giving him a version of herself I thought still belonged to us. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't even feel anger. What I felt was a silence, so deep it swallowed everything. A silence that didn't need words to tell me what had already happened. I didn't storm in. I didn't confront her. I just stood there, frozen, watching the truth unfold in front of me. Watching the woman I loved give her warmth to someone else like it had never been mine. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. But the tear that tried to fall didn't. Maybe even it understood that letting go of that one tear meant admitting everything was over. I stepped back from the window. Then again, the world blurred around me, but not because of the rain, because something inside me cracked in a way that would never be the same again. When I reached my car, I sat in the dark with the rain, closing me off from the world outside. And for the first time, I understood the truth I had been avoiding. I hadn't just lost her that night. She had left me long before I even realized she was gone. When I got home that night, the house looked the same. Same walls, same furniture, same quiet. But nothing felt familiar anymore. It was like I had walked into the ghost of my own life, a place that once belonged to me, but no longer welcomed the man I had become. My legs felt weak as I stepped inside. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. The darkness felt more honest than anything she'd told me in months. The smell of our home, once comforting, hit me like a memory I didn't want to remember. Suddenly, every room felt staged. Every photograph felt false. Every shared moment felt like evidence of a lie I hadn't noticed growing right in front of me. I closed the door gently, almost respectfully, like I was sealing away the last version of myself who believed in her. I didn't cry at first. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just walked into the living room and slowly sank to the floor, my back against the couch, my mind replaying the scene I had seen hours earlier. Her smile, his hand on hers, the way she leaned in, soft and effortless, the way she used to lean toward me. Silence wrapped around me, thick, suffocating, heavy. And in that silence, something inside me began to collapse. People think betrayal hits all at once, like a punch that knocks the air out of you. But it doesn't. It sinks in slowly, like a cold hand pressing deeper into your chest with every breath. I could feel it. I could feel myself breaking from the inside out. I kept asking myself the same question, not, why did she do this? But, when did she stop loving me? When did her eyes stop searching for mine? When did her smile stop meaning anything? When did I become a place she wanted to escape from? I tried to stand, but my body wouldn't move. My chest felt hollow, like someone had carved out everything I believed in. I placed my hand over my heart just to make sure it was still beating. And that was when the first tear finally slipped down my face, slow, hot, heavy. Then another, and another. I didn't sob. I didn't shake. I just broke, quietly. The way a man breaks when he realizes the person he loved most had already let go long before he saw it happening. Hours passed. I stayed on the floor, letting the darkness settle around me. I didn't wipe my tears. I didn't try to stop them. Pain has a way of telling its own truth, and that night, I let it speak. Around midnight, my phone lit up with her name. She was calling. Not to confess, not to explain, but to make sure the lie still worked. I stared at the screen, watched it glow in the dark, and let it ring until it stopped. Not because I was strong, but because I didn't have the strength to pretend anymore. Later, when she walked through the door, she didn't see me in the shadows. She didn't see the dried tears on my face. She didn't see the damage. She hummed softly as she walked past, the same voice she used while lying to me earlier. And something inside me died right then. Not love, not hope, but the part of me that believed she would never do what she had done. I lay down on the couch, not to sleep, but because I couldn't bear to lie beside her. I closed my eyes, not for rest, but to escape the truth for just a few seconds. But truth doesn't leave. It sits with you. It breathes with you. It presses against your ribs. And in that dark, silent night, I whispered to myself, this is where I break. And tomorrow, something in me will have no choice but to rise. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like the world had restarted without asking me if I was ready. I hadn't slept. My eyes were open all night, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing in the bedroom, a room I no longer belonged in. I expected anger when the sun broke the horizon. I expected bitterness, resentment, even despair. But none of that came. What I felt was emptiness. A strange, quiet emptiness, the kind that stretches through you, hollowing the old parts of yourself, leaving space for something new. I stood slowly, my body heavy, my mind oddly clear. The pain was there, sharp and raw, but something inside me had shifted overnight. Maybe it was acceptance. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe the truth had finally settled into my bones. I wasn't holding on anymore. Not to her. Not to the illusion of us. Not to what had already been lost. I brewed coffee without thought. She came into the kitchen, hair messy, a smile practiced, eyes carefully avoiding mine. She said, "You woke up early." I nodded. No anger. No confrontation. No questions. Just silence. That silence unsettled her. She expected the old me, the man who begged, who questioned, who chased, who fought for something she had already taken from me in her heart. But that man was gone. I wasn't reborn in fire. I wasn't reborn in rage. I was reborn in stillness. The kind of stillness that makes people uneasy. The kind that signals a change too deep for words to capture. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like the world had restarted without asking me if I was ready. I hadn't slept. My eyes were open all night, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing in the bedroom, a room I no longer belonged in. I expected anger when the sun broke the horizon. I expected bitterness, resentment, even despair. But none of that came. What I felt was emptiness. A strange, quiet emptiness, the kind that stretches through you, hollowing the old parts of yourself, leaving space for something new. I stood slowly, my body heavy, my mind oddly clear. The pain was there, sharp and raw, but something inside me had shifted overnight. Maybe it was acceptance. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe the truth had finally settled into my bones. I wasn't holding on anymore. Not to her. Not to the illusion of us. Not to what had already been lost. I brewed coffee without thought. She came into the kitchen, hair messy, a smile practiced, eyes carefully avoiding mine. She said, "You woke up early." I nodded. No anger. No confrontation. No questions. Just silence. That silence unsettled her. She expected the old me, the man who begged, who questioned, who chased, who fought for something she had already taken from me in her heart. But that man was gone. I wasn't reborn in fire. I wasn't reborn in rage. I was reborn in stillness. The kind of stillness that makes people uneasy. The kind that signals a change too deep for words to capture. She rushed through her morning routine while I stood by the window. Cars passed. People hurried. Life moved, indifferent to the grief I carried. And I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to before. Pain doesn't kill you. Pain empties you. And once you are empty, you can fill yourself with something that belongs to you alone. I grabbed my keys and left the house without explaining. I didn't need permission. I didn't need validation. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed myself. I drove aimlessly, letting the road carry me until I stopped at an old park I hadn't seen in years. I sat on a bench, alone, watching the sun cut through the clouds. And in that quiet, I said to myself, softly, but with a clarity I hadn't known I possessed, I won't fight for someone who no longer chooses me. The words didn't heal me instantly. They weren't a magic shield against the heartbreak, but they opened a door inside me, a door I had shut while trying to hold onto a love that had already left, a door to a version of myself I had forgotten, dignified, strong, self-contained, silent, but unshakable. That was my moment of rebirth, not with rage, not with confrontation, but with understanding. I didn't lose her. I lost myself trying to keep her, and now I was taking myself back. When I returned home, calmer than I had been in weeks, she looked at me strangely, like she could feel the shift. She asked, "Is everything okay?" I looked at her, not to appease, not to comfort her, but to affirm my own truth. "Everything will be," I said, and I meant it, because that morning, in the quiet ruins of my heart, I had taken the first step toward the man I was always meant to become. The days after my rebirth didn't feel real at first. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I woke up in a body I recognized, but in a mind that had shifted. The man who had carried the weight of her absence, who had begged silently for a love that no longer existed, was gone. I stopped waiting for her approval. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped carrying the burden of someone else's choices. And in that silence, I found a freedom I hadn't known in years. I focused on myself, on the work I had abandoned while drowning in longing. Every late night, every early morning became a small rebellion. Small wins turned into momentum. Projects I once neglected became victories, and each one reminded me I was still capable. I still had value. I still mattered to myself. I rebuilt my body alongside my mind. I exercised, not to impress her, not to reclaim attention, but to reclaim strength. Every drop of sweat was a quiet defiance. Every pounding heartbeat whispered, "I am not broken. I am rising." People noticed. Not her. Not the past. The world at large, colleagues, friends, even strangers, they saw the change. They felt the confidence radiating from someone who had been knocked down but refused to stay down. And every glance, every nod felt like a silent victory over everything she had dismissed. She reached out once. A simple text. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately. Hours passed, then a day, then two. My silence became sharper than anger, heavier than confrontation. It was my weapon, honed and invisible, cutting deeper than any fight could. When I finally responded, it wasn't with resentment or pleading. It was with composure. "I'm busy." She didn't understand. She never had. And that confusion, that discomfort, fueled me more than any triumph ever could. I rebuilt myself in every sense. I invested in my skills, expanded my world, and connected with people who recognized my worth without trying to diminish it. Every new connection, every milestone, was a piece of my life reclaimed. Every quiet success was revenge, but not the kind that screams, the kind that is undeniable and entirely mine. And yet, in the rise, I discovered something far more powerful than revenge. I discovered myself. The man I had silenced for years, patient, loyal, underestimated, had awoken. He didn't need apologies. He didn't need explanations. He didn't need her. He needed only himself. By the end of the month, I was no longer a shadow in my own life. I was visible, strong, untouchable, a man who didn't just survive betrayal, but thrived because of it. And in the quiet of her absence, I realized the cruelest truth of all. She had already lost me. Long before I ever confronted the past, I had risen. And that rise, silent, patient, unstoppable, was mine alone. She came back, not with honesty, not with regret, not even with shame. She came back confused, hesitant, afraid. The first time I saw her, after weeks of rising in silence, everything about her had shifted. Her eyes, once indifferent, flickered with uncertainty. Her posture, once commanding, now seemed smaller. Her voice, once confident and steady, trembled when she spoke. "Can we talk?" she asked low, almost pleading. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence carried everything my words never could. It screamed, "I am not the man you can manipulate anymore. I am not waiting for your affection. I have risen beyond your reach." She shifted, uneasy, like a child caught in a lie she couldn't hide. Her hands fidgeted with her phone, her charm faltering with every attempt to reclaim the narrative she had already lost. Every glance, every smile, every half-hearted apology fell flat, because I had already stopped depending on her. Days passed, and she tried subtle things. A kind word here, a smile there, small touches meant to lure me back. I let none of it through, not out of hatred, not out of spite, but because I respected myself enough to protect the walls I had built from the ruins she once left behind. Her fear became visible, in the way she paused before speaking, in the hesitation of her laughter, in the loss of the confident stride she had worn like armor for so long. That fear wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream. It was quiet, insidious, and entirely of my making. My silence had become her torment. Her power over me was gone, and that terrified her more than any confrontation ever could. One evening, she whispered, I don't understand. You're not the same man I knew." I looked at her calmly. No anger, no shouting, no pleading for recognition. Just steady, unshakable clarity. "I am," I said, "not the man you think you know. I'm the man I always needed to be." The words themselves didn't wound her. The silence between them did. The understanding that she could no longer control me, that she could no longer hurt me at will, sank into her like a quiet knife. And I watched as the realization settled, shaking her in ways I had only imagined when I was lost. And in that fear, I found something greater than revenge. I found freedom. Freedom from pain. Freedom from betrayal. Freedom from expectation. Freedom to live fully, without hesitation, without compromise, on my terms. She left that night uncertain, timid, aware that the person she once held was no longer reachable. And I stayed, calm, steady, untouchable, the man she had once known and the man she had lost. For the first time since it all began, I felt whole. Because power isn't loud. Power doesn't roar. Power is silent. And in my silence, I had become unstoppable. The universe doesn't always punish. Sometimes it simply reveals. By now, I had built a life she could no longer touch. A life of focus, of strength, of clarity. A life where her absence no longer haunted me, where her presence had become unnecessary, even cumbersome. And yet, the most striking change wasn't mine. It was hers. She began to crumble, not in front of anyone, not with drama, but quietly, subtly. The man she had chosen, the one she thought could replace me, started fading from her life as easily as she had faded from mine. The next time we crossed paths, I saw it in her eyes, fleeting panic, worry she tried to conceal. Her words were hollow, Her touches were empty. That confidence that had once made her untouchable, gone. She was unraveling, and it was silent, undeniable, unavoidable. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because the truth itself was louder than any victory I could claim. She had lost everything she thought she controlled. And in losing her, I realized something essential. The sweetest revenge isn't in breaking her heart. It's in breaking free of hers. It's in living fully, unapologetically, silently thriving while she remains trapped in the consequences of her own choices. It all came to a head one evening, quiet, ordinary, yet somehow monumental. She stood before me again, her expression tangled with guilt, fear, and desperation. The realization had finally reached her eyes. She hadn't just lost me. She had lost the control she thought she wielded over my life. I was wrong, she said, voice breaking. I thought I wanted something else, but I see now. Her words faltered unfinished. The man she was trying to convince, herself or me, I wasn't sure, was nowhere in them. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply watched. My presence, calm and steady, carried more weight than anything I could say. I see now that I've hurt you, she whispered. But I never imagined you'd become like this. Like what? I asked softly. Like someone who doesn't need me? Like someone who has already moved on? Her silence answered more than any words could. In that quiet, I realized she was finally seeing the truth I had lived through every day of despair, every night of heartbreak, every morning of rebirth. I'm not defined by her choices. I am not bound to her mistakes. I am free. I forgive you, I said quietly, without urgency or flourish. Not because you deserve it, but because I no longer need the weight of anger in my heart. I've already freed myself. She stared at me, disbelief written across her face. For years, she had held power over me, not realizing that the man she betrayed was learning to wield it, not against her, but for himself. Every quiet moment of pain had been shaping me into someone she could no longer touch. No tears fell. No shouting eruptive. No desperate pleas. Just truth. Just clarity. Just the scales of my life tilting back into balance. In that stillness, I understood something profound. Confrontation doesn't require rage. Closure doesn't demand chaos. Power isn't loud. Strength isn't measured in how much you break others. True power is quiet, patient, unwavering, the kind that makes the past irrelevant. That night, I went to bed with a mind at peace. Not because the betrayal was forgotten, not because the pain had vanished, but because I had faced every doubt, every fear, every shadow that had haunted me since it began. And I had emerged unshaken, unbroken, untouchable. The past no longer chained me. The hurt no longer defined me. Every echo of betrayal had become a lesson, every tear a foundation, every silence a shield. And the ultimate truth, the one I had been building toward from the very beginning, settled in my soul. I had already won, because freedom, clarity, and self-possession are victories no one can take away. I closed my eyes that night, not to escape, but to rest in the knowledge that I was complete, whole, strong, and finally, truly free. The days after the confrontation felt light. Strangely, almost impossibly light. Not because the memories had disappeared, not because the betrayal had been erased, but because they no longer held power over me. They were echoes now, faint and distant, no longer dictating my heartbeat, my choices, my life. I walked differently, each step deliberate, each breath intentional. The quiet spaces that once rang with doubt now hummed with possibility. Spaces where despair had settled were now empty, ready for me to fill with a life I had been too afraid to claim before. I visited places I had abandoned, old cafes, the park where I once dreamed, the streets I had avoided when grief followed me like a shadow. I spent time with people who reminded me of the man I wanted to be, the man I had lost under years of compromise and silent suffering. I pursued passions I had shelved long ago, hobbies, skills, ambitions I had buried beneath the weight of love gone wrong. Each act, no matter how small, was a reclamation of myself. She lingered in my mind, sometimes a shadow, a reminder of betrayal, yes, but also of the strength she had unknowingly awakened in me. And yet, I no longer needed her to validate me. I no longer needed revenge, confrontation, or the fleeting satisfaction of proving myself. My life itself had become the answer. Every choice, every accomplishment, every quiet smile to myself testified to a resilience that had been forged in the fire she had left behind. Sometimes I wondered if she ever realized what she had lost. But no longer mattered. What mattered was the man I had become. Whole, resilient, unshakable. Every scar, every sleepless night, every tear had been transformed into a quiet power that no one could touch. And in that quiet triumph, I understood the truth. Revenge is loud, fleeting, and hollow. Growth is silent. Growth endures. Growth builds from the inside out. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be broken. One evening, I leaned against the window, watching the sun dip slowly below the horizon, its golden light spilling across the city. The warmth of that light felt like a promise that the storm had passed, that the pain had served its purpose, and that my life was mine to shape. I whispered to myself, softly but with certainty, I am free. I am whole. And in the end, some goodbyes are blessings in disguise. The storm had left. The pain had shaped me. And in the silence that followed, I found something far greater than victory or revenge. I found strength. I found peace. I found myself. And in that quiet, enduring stillness, I finally understood. My life, my power, my joy, they were mine, unshakable and eternal. Because silence, after all, had become my greatest strength,